welcome all. Okay, it is the top of the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. Just a few housekeeping things before we, go on our way today. Just remember that out of respect to the speakers, we want to ask that you refrain from any photo or video captures, okay? We will have this session recorded and available for future viewing through the link on the registration website. Remember, we can't really have you do any recording or photographs of another person's presentation unless if you have their permission, so that's prohibited. At this time, all of the attendees except for the speaker are in listen-only mode with the video off. So as a moderator, I'm Dr. Michelle King. I'm happy to raise any questions that you go ahead and enter into the chat in that Q&A. Sorry, go ahead and put that in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, okay? So with that, we'll officially start. So welcome to the APS's Physiology and Industry Committee webinar. We're going to take a look today at how to apply and adapt to the life sciences industry. So this will include things like how to customize your resume, interviewing strategies, and adapting to workplace culture. But before I send it over to our speakers, we can meet our panel. So we have Dr. Andy Hemmer, go ahead and wave there, Dr. Margie Zak, and Mr. Lawrence Beck. So for our first kind of session, we'll dive right in. We're going to talk about industry career options available to physiologists. So with that, I will kick it over to Dr. Hemmer.
Great, thank you, Dr. King. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today. It is an absolute pleasure to be a part of this session. My name is Andy Hemmert. I am the Senior Vice President of Molecular R&D and Programs with bioMérieux. So bioMérieux is a global medical device company. We specialize in the design, development, support, and sale of infectious disease diagnostic products. I'm located in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I lead an organization of around 650 individuals that are focused on essentially developing COVID tests at this time, but we've been doing tests for infectious disease long before COVID. I'm excited to share with you all today just some of my perspective on opportunities in industry. I will say that when I was a postdoc many years ago, there were very few options ever shared with me about what is available in industry. And so what I'd like to just start off by sharing, and if my other panelists can nod their head that the slide appears okay, thank you. This is just a quick summary that I put together of careers in the medical device industry where I work that are available for PhD scientists. And I've formatted this slide to kind of show the continuum within the product development lifecycle from early product research and concept on the far left-hand side to product launch, clearance, and support on the right-hand side. And so where you are in your careers, if you haven't heard very much about what opportunities are available in industry, you can see there's a whole host of various career options to where your training as a scientist is absolutely applicable. For me, in my career track, I actually started initially within the regulated and clinical affairs space. I shortly moved to R&D after that, and I spent most of my career as a research and development scientist, and now moving into a management and leadership role. But there are also many opportunities within marketing, within medical affairs, within program and product management. Once the product is launched in the field, there's opportunities in supporting the sales or the post-market support. So when those products are launched, we want to make sure they're still performing as claimed. Also in the regulatory affairs space, it's a really interesting space to understand all the different regulatory dynamics around the world. And so this slide will be available in the recording, and I would invite you to look over it. And as you're looking for career opportunities, searching through industry websites, these are some of the various careers to where your training in science is absolutely applicable, and I think highly valued within a number of these positions. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to the next panelist, but excited to be with you today.
Dr. Margie Zak, you can go ahead.
Can you see my screen? Okay, I know it's in the one mode, but I'm going to just keep it in this mode because I think you can read it very easily. So my name is Margie Zach. I am a PharmD by training. I have been with the industry for I'm going on 24 years within pharmaceuticals. Prior to that, I was in academia, more on the pharmaceutical side as a PharmD and rounding in hospitals. My current role is a senior director of medical science liaisons and outcome liaisons at Akebia. My entire career has been within the medical affairs field medical portion of it. So that is the area that I've really honed in on. I do live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is very nice if you like where you live, that you can work remotely and hybrid in positions like mine. So that is something that I would say has been very good for me. In looking at the different career opportunities, more in the pharmaceutical versus device, you're going to see some similarities to what Andy showed, and you're going to see some differences. So the research part of it is really, really much is geared towards individuals with your training, such as a PhD. For me to, as a PharmD work in research, I may be able to, but you have the expertise and you have a much greater depth of knowledge. Opportunities are in phase 1, 2, and 3, clinical operations, drug development, statistics, data analytics, a program director or project manager for the research projects, or medical directors. And medical directors typically are either MDs or PhDs, typically not PharmDs. So you'll see, because of the experience that you have, that I don't have the depth of in my role. In terms of medical affairs, that's where I've lived and breathed for my entire career. There's medical science liaison who are more dealing with physicians. Outcome liaisons or value are more working with organizations, and they're really thinking of what is the total value. So beyond more just the science, what is the value? What are the outcomes? What is the real world data? What are the cost offsets? There's also program directors or project managers in medical affairs, medical directors here, and the difference being what phase of drug development, whether it's early phase or post-marketing, post-approval. There are trainers that we'll have, as well as medical information, communication, and publications. Lastly, there's some miscellaneous things that you saw. Some, again, were similar to Andy, some weren't. Regulatory affairs, that's really who's working with our approval processes, anything like that. There's quality control. There are sales positions available. Market access are typically those people on the commercial team that are working with payers or population-based health decision makers, so not prescribing for a person, but putting things on formulary. And lastly, sales training. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Lawrence. And Lawrence, I'm going to stop sharing, but there may be some things that you want to comment on as well. You are muted.
There we go. All right. No, I think that was a great overview. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. We're going to get into a few pointers on resumes and interviewing, some do's and don'ts, some common mistakes. But my name is Lawrence Beck. I am a recruiter in the pharmaceutical world. I'm with a company called SimBio, where we're based in Texas, and our focus is in the category that Margie mostly described there, in medical affairs. Give me 1 second here. And okay, can I get a thumbs up if all looks good? All right. So again, my expertise is recruiting and medical affairs, and I've done my best though to make these tips be kind of applicable to I think most, if not all, areas of the pharmaceutical and life sciences world. So let's just start by diving into kind of a basic, I think we know what we're doing here, but let's just dive into this by starting with the goals of our resume, right? So we're providing an overview of your experience for a prospective employer, right? Okay, that's kind of a no-brainer, but this is a marketing tool, right? And so your resume it should be marketing your skills and accomplishments to a prospective employer. You want to, of course, provide a connection to your relevant experiences that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. And of course, at the end of the day, the goal is that resume gets you an interview, right? And then you could take it from there. So resume do's and don'ts. So the good news here is that there are no hard and fast rules with resumes. There's not a font or a particular format that you have to use. You've got a little bit of flexibility to give it your own personal touch, but we don't want to go too crazy, right? And if any of the other panelists want to chime in, please feel free, because I know that you guys have reviewed many resumes too. So for starters, I do want to say, put your contact info and location. There's been this trend lately where people don't want to include a location. I think most of the time that is for privacy concerns, and I understand that, but you should at least include a city or a metro area that you're in. The problem is if you don't include a location at all, hiring managers are going to assume that you're hiding the fact that you don't live local to the position, and sometimes that might be the case. Maybe you want to relocate to Boston or wherever the headquarters is for that in-house position, but you should include your location. And then I'm sorry, I skipped ahead too early. And of course, include a phone number and email address in your contact info. That seems silly to remind everyone, but it's actually surprising how often I see resumes without contact info. So next, we want to include a professional summary. So this is where you're going to talk about your expertise, but you're also going to want to talk about what you're looking to achieve in your career. And this is a good way to slip in some keywords that are going to be beneficial to have on your resume too. So when you apply for a position and you submit your resume online somewhere, there's a lot of different ways that those resumes might get screened. And sometimes people, or maybe even some sort of software or computers, they're screening your resume for certain keywords, and they might not know how to tell if you're qualified without having certain keywords in there. So this is your chance to include a line like aspiring medical director or aspiring research scientist, something like that, and make sure that they'll see that early on, and they'll know that your resume is worth it for them to keep reading. And then to round things out, as far as what we definitely want to include, if you're looking for a framework here, include your education, include your work experience, relevant publications and presentations, and organization memberships that you're part of. So what we want to do, though, is we want to be detailed yet concise. I know that sounds kind of contradictory, but hopefully you'll understand my point. You don't want to be generic. You don't want to resort to job description speak in your bullets. Be detailed in what you did, include specifics around projects, research, accomplishments, but don't ramble on more than you need to either. You've got a limited amount of attention to expect whoever's reading your CV to go over. So don't risk losing it on unnecessary words. The research, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the numbers, but if the research shows that if an HR person is going through a stack of resumes, you've got about 8 seconds to catch their attention before they decide if it's worth it to keep going or not. So you wanna get kind of to the point. I would also suggest that you do use measurables to show your impact where it's applicable, because you want to give your reader something tangible to hold on to where you can. Again, we want to avoid job description speak. We want to avoid you having the same copy and pasted bullets that a lot of the other resumes have. So use specific measurables that you could offer for your job experiences. So then we want to be uniform throughout the resume. So I see a lot of resumes that will do things like change the format of the dates of their employment. Or maybe on page 1, the bullets of their work experience are indented this far in, and then on page 2, maybe indented a little bit further in. This is a cheap and easy way to ensure a clean, crisp-looking resume. Just make sure your style stays consistent throughout. And I mean, we could work with a lot of different fonts. We don't need to get too nitpicky on that, but keeping things uniform is a good way just to make sure it looks nice. And then do proofread. Sounds like a no-brainer, but you might be surprised what you can miss. Like if something is on this list, I promise there's a reason, and I see these things a lot. So what don't we want to do on our resume? So first and foremost, don't force it down to 2 pages. We get this a lot. Whittling a resume down to 2 pages is a general rule of thumb in a lot of industries, but pharma is not one, not in my experience anyway, not medical affairs. Medical affairs culture is one where we want to see your experience. And don't get me wrong, there's a line you could eventually cross, but people are not going to ask, oh, what is this person thinking if you stretched it to 4 pages or 5 pages. I mean, we want to see what you've done, and you do not need to shortchange yourself and cut down your experiences to squeeze it down to a shorter resume. We don't want to include a photo of yourself. If you're applying for a sales position, I think it's kind of a thing in the sales world, but the vast majority of positions in pharma and life sciences, we would not want to do that. Don't copy and paste job descriptions to fill your job function bullets. I kind of touched on that in the last column, but you use your own words and let the reader feel like they are hearing you explain your role. And sometimes, sometimes job descriptions, they, it doesn't really give you all the credit that you deserve. So don't copy and paste that. We don't want to get too complicated with format either. So what I mean by this is I see a lot of really nice, sharp-looking resumes, but you've got to keep some things in mind. So we see things like sometimes someone will insert a column on the side. Like maybe they'll have their experience in this nice vertical column, and then to the side of that will be work experience. Or sometimes people will draw word boxes, and they'll use maybe like a color in the header. The thing about your resume that you've got to remember, though, is it is not only being looked over by human eyes. It's going to be looked over by computer eyes, too, and it's going to get parsed in with certain programs whenever you apply online. And the thing is, those systems don't always do well with that, and they might it might jumble it all up, and there's a lot of different ways it can mess that stuff up. So anyway, I suggest kind of not getting too crazy with things like that, and keeping it to simple text. And then I'm going to kind of include a bonus here that I didn't type down, but if you're going to put a link to your LinkedIn profile on your resume, you've got to make sure that your LinkedIn bio does indeed align with your resume. You're only going to raise questions if you have dates that don't align, or maybe your LinkedIn includes a position in the past that you've decided to leave off of your resume. We see that kind of a lot, and that'll only raise questions. So if you're going to put the link on there, make sure all is good, and all is good and uniform between the two versions. All right. All right. So I'm going to get into some common interview mistakes here too. So first and foremost, you not having questions prepared is one of the #1 mistakes that we see people make in interviews. You need to have questions prepared for yourself. And I don't mean the same, kind of go-to questions that a lot of people have, like compensation, travel, in-office work versus remote work. I mean, these are important, but we could find other times to get those answers. During your interviews, you want to stick to things that are specific to the position. Asking more questions on your end is going to help you not only learn more about the position, but it's also going to show that you've done some homework. I mean, think about it. The more you study something, the more the wheels up here start spinning, the more questions you start thinking. And so, asking some deep questions about the company and their science and the drug landscape, the competitive landscape. And those are going to show that you've done your homework. And better yet, point out something that you read on the job description. Not everyone even reads the whole job description sometimes, but definitely have several questions ready. There are going to be times, and it doesn't happen that often, but there's going to be times when you interview with someone and they start the interview with, "Okay, so what questions do you have ready for me?" And you don't want to get caught flat-footed there. Don't always bank on the conversation itself, spawning questions for you. Next up is a more recent thing, a more modern day problem, and that is lack of professionalism in virtual interviews. I think that we're in this day and age when we're doing virtual meetings all the time, so much that we're a little maybe desensitized to what they should be, and this bleeds over into interviews too. And this presents itself in a lot of ways. Sometimes it means lacking eye contact because you are looking down at yourself too much and not making eye contact with the camera. Sometimes that we've got people who have dual monitor setups where all the material that they're looking at is over here rather than the monitor with the camera, and that kind of makes it awkward. The interviewer's not going to feel like they're connecting with you very well. And then we still get people who don't dress up for an interview because they think it's just virtual. But you should definitely treat your virtual interviews the same as you would an in-person interview. Next up, this might be the number one most common piece of feedback that we receive when a hiring manager is not going to move forward with someone. We hear that they're just too long-winded, people talk in circles, and we get this feedback that will be like, I would ask them a question and they would talk for 5 minutes before finally answering the question, and then by then I'm not even sure that they did answer my question. And so yes, I understand that you want to connect with the interview, but there's a balance here. You want to connect with your interviewer, but keep in mind that they have to judge your communication style and how it's going to work with the other people that you're interacting with in your role. And that could be practitioners, that could be top academic researchers, it could be executive leadership. So they want you to answer the questions and kind of get to the point. And lastly, or not lastly, but for getting a thank you note. You definitely want a good thank you note, and you want to do it very quickly after your interviews. A good rule of thumb, I think, is within 24 hours, but I don't even know that I would wait that long. A lot of the roles that we're discussing today in life sciences are ones where punctuality and a sense of urgency are really key, and follow-up is key. And I think the quicker you could get a thank you note out, the better it shows that that's a trait that you possess. And then lastly, trying to close. So this is kind of a thing that, again, we see a lot in sales roles. If you are indeed interviewing for a sales role, this is not the worst idea. But outside of that, we see people try to close out their interviews with things like, do you think I'll be moving forward? Or maybe, do you see any reason that you wouldn't move forward with me? And once in a blue moon, we get something as bold as, so can I have the job? And these are tactics that they're just not necessarily the most conducive to a good professional interview most of the time. I would not recommend going that way. So then my last slide here that I want to cover is how to stand out in the competition. So first of all, we want to build a network. The most important piece of advice I could give you on the network thing is whatever position you want, and there might not be one, and maybe there's going to be a handful of things that interest you for your career, but you want to talk to people in those roles. It is one thing to do a bunch of Googling and reading a bunch of job descriptions and watching short videos on YouTube about what it means to be in said position. And you could go in and you could regurgitate all the info in interview. But it's one thing to do that, and it's a whole nother thing to take in true firsthand accounts of what it's like having your feet in the shoes of someone in that position. I would suggest finding someone local to you. And you might have to reach out to a lot of people. It sometimes it takes dozens, maybe 100 contacts before you get a few people that have the time to offer up. But I would try to find people local to you, offer to take them out for coffee and pick their brain a little bit. Ask them what a true day-to-day looks like in that role. Listen to them explain the challenges, the surprises that they've encountered in that job, what they love about it, what they don't, and most importantly, you'll hear them. You'll hear the lingo. You'll hear them talk the talk. And when you get in an interview after having these, a lot of people call them like informational interviews or intake interviews. When you do that, hiring managers can absolutely tell the difference. It shows commitment, and it's just, I don't know. There's a difference. People can tell that you've taken you've gone the extra mile to learn about the jobs that you are interviewing for and claiming that you're interested in. So build your network and use it to learn more about the career path that you want to take. So then next up, use that network. And what I mean by that is, I always suggest to people to apply online as a last resort. Use your recruiters, use friends at the companies that you're applying to, anyone before applying online. Now, yes, people absolutely get interviews and they get jobs through applying online, but having someone that you know is going to get your resume to the right person is always a better way to start. So then I covered this a little bit earlier, but make sure that you've got some keywords in there on your resume and cover letter. I think when you're early in your career, this is a little bit more important than maybe later. But some of you are going to have backgrounds that could be angled differently for various roles and different therapeutic spaces or drug classes, whatever the case may be. And I think earlier in your career, it's important to kind of tweak your cover letters and resumes just a little bit to make sure that it's the best fit for the job you're applying for. Next up, study and study and study. And this seems obvious, but it's an absolute must. Gone are the days when it's okay to go into a phone interview and expect to do your first round of learning about the job in the phone interview. That I think that's a route that a lot of people used to take, but you just can't do that nowadays. There's so much material out there. You got to study the company's website, of course, but look at their pipeline, read through relevant package inserts, look over the interviewers' bios, look up the clinical trials, know their competitors, and also make sure you're watching YouTube videos to make sure you're pronouncing drug names right. Some of them are kind of tough, and I always make sure to kind of double and triple check that I'm pronouncing things right before I start talking with people about drug names. And also, look at patient advocacy websites. Especially if you're working or if you're interviewing for a position that's in a rare disease, these patient advocacy websites are great sources to hear testimonials and really get a feel for the community that you'd be serving by working in that particular space. And then you want to be team oriented. One of the things that's particularly important about working in industry is that you are almost always going to be working within some sort of a team. And I think we kind of plan on getting into this a little bit later in the panel, but that's an important thing to show that you're going to fit in with the culture at these companies. And then lastly, if you're going to break into the life sciences industry, you're going to go up against some really experienced people. They're going to have more skins on the wall than you do. And the best thing you could do to neutralize that experience gap is to show them that you are a go-getter, that you know you're going to excel at this type of role, and show them that you are coachable and that you will come in ready to knock it out of the park every single day. I think the reality is that there's kind of a spectrum there where that the more experience you have, the less you kind of lose that throughout your career, but you can absolutely still get the jobs that you want with less experience if you knock it out with your enthusiasm. And then again, I'm going to hit on the thank you notes one more time. A well-written thank you note is a great way to cap off your interview and to stand out. So that is it for me.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I
Sure.
just want to remind everybody to go ahead and put their questions in the chat. I want to open it up to our panelists to ask Mr. Beck some questions before we move on. Otherwise, I have a few questions myself.
Lawrence, I think there were 2 points I would just touch on from what you said in your slides. Number one, what I've seen a lot in resumes is to be concise. And so really make sure you're picking the key points. A resume is going to get your foot in the door, and you want to make sure that you come across very clearly in that. And then I think also the formatting and the proofreading, those little details matter. When I'm reviewing resumes, I generally get so many that if I start to see little signs that maybe they didn't give enough attention to it, it could turn me off from a resume quite quickly. So I think those are two really important points you mentioned.
Thank you. Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, we're not all, spellers. We're not all that's not everyone's expertise. So don't be shy to share it with a friend and have them read over it.
I have a question and wanted to get the panel's opinion on this. When you're presenting your resume or your CV for these types of positions, is it best to have a chronological type of CV, or is it best to just put those really important experiences on that front or that first page? What's your guys' take on that?
I certainly prefer chronological, with most recent at the top, going to past. I've seen a handful of resumes that have done it the opposite way. But yes, I definitely prefer chronological.
I think for education and work experience, chronological, but then what's the objective you're trying to achieve in your resume? And so it may be that you tell the story differently after you've given the chronological dates, focusing it on the job you're trying to apply for.
Great. I'll just to kind of add and circle in on this topic while we're in here. Some of the attendees were wondering, what are some good starter questions to ask the interviewer?
One of the things that I suggest asking is, what are some of the challenges that are going to be needed to be addressed by whoever you hire? I see it's my experience as a recruiter is in a very specific space that is not going to be everyone's target career. But one of the things that I like to suggest people ask, not necessarily to the hiring manager, but let's say it's a peer interview, or maybe it's an HR interview. I like to suggest ask people, hey, well, what could I do to make my boss's life easier? And whoever that may be, who are the hiring managers for that position, what can I do to make their life easier? And I think it's a good question because it shows that you're not just thinking about yourself. You're not just thinking about your own career advancement here. You want to come in and you want to come in and be a part of this team that is going to be a well-oiled machine, right? Where everyone is ready to scratch each other's backs. It's not just about you rising to the top.
I think if there were someone applying for a job, say in my company where we're building medical devices, and you've taken the time and studied the website and looked through, and I would ask questions you have specific to the products that are being developed by the team you're applying for. So, for example, you might ask, what was the most challenging aspect of developing product A? And, why did you decide to target these pathogens versus those pathogens? It's just showing a curiosity and an interest in what the team does as a whole. And I think asking those why questions and showing that you're interested in what you will hopefully be doing one day says a lot. So, but that you have to do your homework to do that. If someone comes in and they haven't given any time or attention into what we're developing in device space, it shows in an interview very quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, anything that you could use to kind of show off that you did some research. I mean, sometimes, the reality is, I think you could ask a question that you know the answer to, but if if you can use it to kind of show off just how deep you dug while doing your research, that's always a beneficial thing to ask. Another thing, and again, I don't want to step on the toes of our one of the future topics we're about to get into, but asking about team culture is always good because again, that's everyone wants a good team culture. Everyone wants a good company culture, and if you could prove to them that that's a priority of yours too, kind of shows that we're all on the same page here.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then just one more question that I think fits in with this. So when you're doing the thank yous, what's the best kind of format without, with truly sounding grateful? And then how do you, sometimes you don't have the contact information. How do you go about one, getting the contact information and then making sure your thank you actually, expresses your gratitude, but also, demonstrates that you're appropriate for the role?
If you don't have the contact info, I'm just I would think that there'd be a way to get it. I mean, if you just have to resort to like a LinkedIn in mail, I think that's probably appropriate nowadays. I think that I don't know that you'd run into anyone that wouldn't like it that way. But I mean, there should be a way to get. I mean, again, if you're going through a recruiter like myself, I mean, we should always have that. But if it was an HR person that reached out to set up the interview, I would go through them. I mean, there should always be at least someone in the process that could get you the contact info. But again, if you have to resort to a LinkedIn and mail, I think that's fine. My number one rule on thank you notes is to certainly not send like a copy pasted thank you note. You definitely would want to highlight some things from the interview itself. Thank you for your time today. I'm even more excited about this position than I was prior to speaking with you. X, Y, and Z really stands out to me, and I really appreciate the insight that you gave me on such and such. Looking forward to the next steps. Something like that, I think is a good framework for your typical thank you note. And even if let's say you're doing a final stage of the interview where you meet with half a dozen people throughout the day, which is the way that a lot of the interview processes are going to go. Even then, I would not ever send a group thank you note, and I would not send any two people the same thank you note. I mean, do your best. And I know it's going to be tough, but do your best to remember bits and pieces from every individual conversation you had and address it with those people when you send out your notes.
Any other comments from the panelists? I just have one, I think, before we move on to our next section, I have one more question. And I think you kind of touched on this, but a lot of the chats or questions coming through is about how can you really structure your resume when it doesn't match up exactly for the job requirements? So they feel like, they're a good candidate, they feel that they can do these things, but how can they really kind of, get either the non human eyes to match up there? What are your thoughts?
I guess initially I would say Lawrence touched on this briefly, but this is a great opportunity for a cover letter to be able to explain the differences between perhaps your resume and the uniqueness of your resume versus if it doesn't match up perfectly to what's being looked for. Now, this might not help you with the computer systems, but if it gets to then a human at that point, I mean, a cover letter is a beautiful way for you be able to describe your uniqueness and why maybe initially it might not appear a good fit, but then in fact you are really a great fit because of this unique blend. So I would highly encourage the attendees to think about including a well thought out cover letter that does very clearly be able to describe how you are qualified when you're formatting your resume might not be exact.
Yeah, if you're really taking a Hail Mary and applying for something that you just have no experience in and you
Can you
really
guys
think
hear me?
yes. Okay, I think she can't hear us, unfortunately. If you're really taking a Hail Mary and applying for something that you just have like no real ties to, I think you've got to make a big personal appeal and explain in your cover letter. I know you're going to look at my resume and see that I haven't worked in this role or this space yet, but you know, I'm interested because of X, Y, and Z. It is my career goal to get into this, and I don't know. It's a very broad question. I think there's ways to do it, and I agree with I agree with that sentiment that it's up to you to kind of explain it as well as you can in your cover letter at that point.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just kind of moving that topic a
Can
little
you
bit
guys
into
hear
the
me at all
next.
now?
Oh, we can, Margie. Can you hear us? We can hear you now. Okay, we'll give her some more time while we work on that on the back end. But kind of leading into this next, how can they, and you guys touched a little bit on this, but is there a way for job seekers to kind of frame their past experience into like industry culture? So specifically moving from maybe academia to industry. So how can they kind of frame that or tweak that?
Yeah, so I'll share my experience. So I came from doing a postdoc in X-ray crystallography. So I'm a biochemist by training. And so I was doing an academic project trying to understand the structure of a protein and some compounds bound into it. What I did when I was interviewing for an industry position at that point is I made sure in my job talk to describe how we could turn this academic project into an industry project, how we could turn it into a product development. So I described how, based on the knowledge of this structure with this ligand bound, you could then do experiments X, Y, and Z, and you could turn it into this kind of product that could be useful for these reasons. So I think you need to show that you can take an academic concept, whatever it might be, and think about what the product is for some customer one day. If you start to show that mindset in your interview, I mean, to me, I look for that quite often when I do have scientists interviewing for leadership positions. I want to see that they're thinking about the customer, the end product, how the basic science could transition and morph into something that could be useful.
Thank you. Margie, did you hear? We can hear
You
you
guys
now.
hear
Can
me
you hear
now?
us? Yep.
Oh, yes. Well, I could always hear you, but you couldn't hear me and it was freezing up. Hey, I just wanted to go backwards one thing. With, you know, it has to do with interviewing and questions and things. I loved what Andy said because what he talked about was really personalizing, saying, I did my homework and this is unique to you and your company, and I want to ask a question. You know, Lawrence, the one piece about the culture, I get that every single person. So everybody asks me
Okay.
that question. And so it almost is a throwaway question.
Okay.
It's an important question, but it doesn't make you stand out, if that makes sense, because we just did a whole set. And so when you think about it, just think about what's unique. And then I don't know what the last question was because I was busy trying to get back on, but I wanted to go back and reiterate kind of the uniqueness where, you know, if it's you, Michelle, I'm connecting with you. I care about what you're talking about. I care about your company. I've done my homework. That's really what you're trying to get across, is that empathy, that passion, and that emotional intelligence to say, I'm connecting with you. So, okay.
That's excellent. Did you have any other input about how individuals can frame their past experience to maybe a job that isn't a perfect fit, or maybe they're going from a different area to industry?
Oh, you're cutting out a little bit. Hopefully you guys can hear me again. Okay. If you can't, just go like this so I stop talking. But what I try to do is, what I would recommend is really read the job description. And based on that, that's what you're trying to bring forward. So for example, positions I interview for, which are the liaison roles, you know, when you read it, it says you're presenting to physicians, you're relationship building. And so even if you haven't worked in a hospital or something, what have you done for relationship building? What have you done to really, connect with healthcare or think about a recommendation, whether it's thinking about a product. So what I would recommend is read the job description, think about those keywords, and then think about a transferable skill you have. So you may not have rounded in a hospital or seen patients firsthand, but you worked in a clinic doing research where there was maybe some type of contact with patients or understanding them. So hopefully that wasn't the same as what Andy and Lauren said. Okay, thanks.
That was perfect. Thank you. Very important point. Any other items from the panelists before we kind of move on to our adapting to industry culture?
I just want to touch on really quickly is remembering that an interview will get you, or I'm sorry, a good resume will get your foot in the door, but you also need to practice your interview skills. And the advice that I would throw out to this group, Margie mentioned this in her last comment, has to do with emotional intelligence. I will say that the biggest hiring mistakes that I feel like I've made in my career is I was so in love with the resume that I ignored how the person acted and behaved during the interview. And when I didn't ask enough questions focused on their emotional intelligence, really what I'm looking for is, do they have a growth mindset? Are they going to be able to adapt to when they make a mistake or a colleague makes a mistake, or they're willing to work together and to think about growing rather than being rigid and always right and trying to come across as perfect. I think the interview, like I said, I fell in love with resumes. I ignored the interview and I regret those decisions. Since then, I've learned and grown myself in trying to find a way to interview better. But that is a key component, is the interview itself. So a resume will get you there, but practice your interview and think about, this is becoming more and more common in industry. We're looking for team members with high emotional intelligence.
Yeah, any other thoughts on really cultivating that emotional intelligence or making that shine in the interview? No? Okay. Okay, so we'll move on. Thanks for
Just
that.
reading.
Okay.
It's a two-way conversation. Oops, did you not hear me?
Nope, you're good. Okay, I think Margie was going to say that it's a two-way conversation and trying to perhaps read the interviewer and kind of facilitate the discussion. Okay, great. Okay, so now I'd like to take some time and we can just kind of go around and talk about what were your motivations in selecting a career in industry. And we can also kind of think about, for those of you in the audience, please feel free to put in the chat, what is making you want to join industry? Why don't you want to be in academia anymore, or your current field? So we can go ahead and start with Andy.
Great. So this was an excellent question that I love a lot. I touched on this a little bit in the last section. So near the end of my graduate studies and before my postdoc, I had a discovery in my project to where I thought there would be a really cool application to make a diagnostic test from what I was discovering. And I'll never forget it. It was a Christmas break, almost just like right now. I mean, many, many years ago. But right before I left for Christmas break, I had a key discovery, and then I flew home to visit family. And the whole time I was home, I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be back in the lab because I was so excited by this idea of making this new diagnostic test and taking it in a different direction. And so for me, what really made me want to go into industry is through that moment, I learned that I loved being in a position to where I could take discoveries from the lab and make something tangible and applicable, right? Before that moment, at that time, I was probably one of the world's experts on some enzyme in your liver that no one's ever going to care about. But now I can say I make diagnostic products every single year that save lives. It is documented in literature. We hear case reports again and again. I can't think of anything more meaningful in my career than really saying I get to save a child's life over at the medical center that's near our campus. It has become incredibly personal and meaningful to know that the science that I get to do is having such a big impact on the world versus before. Yeah, I knew about some enzyme at a really expert level, but this has just been so meaningful to see how the products that I get to help create are used. So moving in that direction, I have loved it. I've been doing this for almost 15 years, and every day I'm so grateful I went this direction.
Did I go, Michelle? Okay. Okay. I think it was a good move for you, Andy, because you were really excited about it. And to me, that's a bit of why I went to. I was, talking to one of my assistant deans. So I was rounding at a hospital. I was rounding on 2 services. I was teaching, I think, 70 didactic hours at Pitt, and I had a research project going on. And I was kind of tired, and I was pregnant at that point, and I wasn't as excited anymore. And one of our assistant deans said, you should really do what makes you happy and do what you love. And that really affected me, where I thought, what is it I really love? What is it I like to do? And I made the move to industry because I really like presenting. I really like leading. Um, and I did need at that point more of a work-life balance because I was pregnant with my first child, and going in and rounding that many hours and always being on call was very difficult. And so I moved, like I said, in either 2000 or 2001, and it was just a fantastic move for me. So my motivations were a work-life balance. My husband would call and say, where are you? You're not home. And the other point was finding something I like. And to me, that educational portion of the job was what I liked, and is the side of medical affairs that I went into, or the side of pharma industry. So thank you.
Thanks for that. And Lawrence, you also have a unique background. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually went to school for sports management. I thought I wanted to work in sports, and so I got my master's degree, started doing that, and it I don't know. Unfortunately, I just learned pretty quickly. Like I don't know if this is for me, and so I thought recruiting would be fun. I did. I thought, okay, talking with people, it's a job where my job is a job where you're selling jobs, selling careers to people, and selling those people back to the company. And it's fun when you make those matches. It's fun to me to think of myself as helping to build, like, an all-star cast of MSL, or whatever type of role. And so I got into that to almost by chance. I just happened to start job seeking myself at the same time that Symbio was growing, and so I got to kind of join on the ground floor about 12 years ago, and it's been great. I really love it. And again, I can't speak for every area of life sciences and pharmaceuticals, but I really love working with field medical people. It's such a good group of people. They're smart, they're personable, they're professional. They want to get to know me as I get to know about them, and it's really rewarding career to be in. So I really like it a lot.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So kind of on the same topic is what do you guys each experience as far as workplace culture? So what about the settings, your community? We'll just kind of go around and you guys can kind of describe that.
So in terms of the workplace culture that we have, I would say, first of all, it's a highly collaborative culture. You are expected to work closely with many people who aren't necessarily in your same discipline. So as an R&D scientist, I need to collaborate closely with the engineers, with the regulatory teams, with the marketing teams, the manufacturing teams, the medical affairs. So it is fun to be in such a collaborative environment, but you also need to have kind of that growth mindset and be patient a little bit, because not everyone always speaks the same language. So I would say you need to come in ready to be collaborative. It is not your project, your grant, your paper anymore. It is a team approach. And so that culture is really critical, and that thinking is really critical to thriving in industry. I would say otherwise, this is a big question we get nowadays about remote versus on-site. And in terms of our culture, right now we have a hybrid policy to where it's 50% on-site, and then some teams are full remote and some teams are full on-site, depending on what your function are. I don't know if that was necessarily part of the question, but I get asked that all the time about what the working mode is now. So there are options available depending on what you're looking for.
Go ahead, Margie.
Yeah, I would say the culture is really important. I worked for one company I really enjoyed, loved the culture. The second one where the culture just was not a fit for me. And my company now is a smaller company. And what I really like about the culture now is it's supportive. And that's a two-way support. So I feel supported. I feel that there is a desire to make myself, my team, the company, my department successful, but I am dependent on, and my team is dependent on, to make others, to support others and make them successful as well. So, that goes both ways. We do a ton of teamwork. So maybe different than a pure researcher, or even more than I did when I was rounding and part of small teams, is you're working on larger teams there, and so many cross-functional groups depend on what you do or need updated on it or need communication. So really working as one team, one company is I think really important. They want people to be a learner as well in the culture I work for now. So if I go in and I'm Margie and I know this and this, that works some in some companies. It does not work well in the company I'm in. They want you to have a learner mindset, but be confident in contributing. So you have to be, accountable to know what you know. If you've come into the company, you're trained, you need to know, but I think it's a word Andy used earlier, be curious, be okay with saying, hey, I wonder, have we looked at this enzyme in this area, or have we looked at the pharmacokinetics of this or in this disease state? So those are the things I would say: is supportive, work as one team, be a learner, but ownership and accountability is really important. If you're owning that project, you work with others, you work supported, but you also need to get it done. And I'm speaking of that especially from a home office type, or a home. So I guess I would call it a remote setting, where you have to be working. When you're at home, you can't just say, I couldn't do that. So you have to be self-disciplined. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, those are all really important points. What do you guys think? And maybe Lawrence, you have some feedback on this as well, is how can they try to understand the culture through all of these through the interview process? So a lot of interviews might not be all, on site anymore. Maybe they're all remote. So how do you think they can get some insight, or do you guys have any tips on like questions they could ask? Or is there a way to know until you're, all the way knee deep?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And you're right. It is kind of unfortunate that we don't do in-person interviews all that much anymore. They still exist, but I think a lot of people would agree that sometimes when you walk into the home office, you get a feel, you feel the vibe, and you kind of just can tell there. I think that one way you could do it is to, if it's not part of your interview process already, you could ask to speak with a peer. Maybe the process is to talk with HR, talk to the hiring manager, and kind of, I don't know, maybe do a presentation in some instances and kind of wrap it up from there. I think you could talk with the peer. It would be a good way to hear what the culture is like in the job that you're going to be in. I think you could ask people, well, what's it like working with this manager, or you could ask what the metrics or the KPIs are. How is success measured? That'll give you a good feel too. Um, then yeah, I don't. That's a good question. I don't know that I have very many questions ready to go that kind of get to the point. I think a lot of times you just kind of you kind of know when you feel it. Actually, no, I do have another way. You could ask why the position is open. Now, sometimes I could give you, you maybe pick up on some red flags when you find out why a position is open. If you're able to see that the last person, left after 6 months, then maybe they went to a company that on paper shouldn't be as exciting as the one that you're interviewing for. That could maybe tip you off that there's something going on that that someone's not telling you.
I think you can be a detective too. You can get a feel from the various people that you interview with. Once you kind of pass that HR, you usually might be maybe screened by the hiring manager, but then there's a team. So I think you can be a detective. And I think also why the position is open is a great question. I think that's a very fair question. The other thing is if you have connections, LinkedIn connections are important. And if you know somebody well, not just somebody I've never met that I connected with, but somebody I know well. So if Andy at his company, something came up in medical affairs, could I reach out to him and say, hey, can you tell me about the culture of your company? That to me has really helped me if I've known somebody. And it's hard when you first get in because you don't know as many. But after a while, they're kind of old dogs like me where you hang around and you start to know a lot of people. So word of mouth, taking, if that person left that company and was angry, they might have a skewed opinion. So just take that for what it is. But that's a great way, is just asking somebody, or, what's great about the company you work with? What would you change about the company that you work for right now?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I want to touch on two things that Margie just said. So yes, that's a great question. I wish I thought of that myself, but yes, every now and then I do hear that people ask that question in interviews. And what would you change if anything? And that's a really good, and that's a good question. It's not necessarily it doesn't have to come with negative connotations, but yeah, that's a great question. And then Margie makes a great point about using your network to ask about culture too. I do want to offer a word of caution about websites out there where people can post anonymously, because that's where people rush to when they're angry. And so like Dr. Zach was saying, sometimes you'll get skewed opinions there, not necessarily a genuine opinion. Luckily, Cafe Pharma I don't think is all that popular anymore, but back when it was pretty toxic. I would not put all your eggs in some of those baskets.
Those are good
Let,
tips.
let me add that I think out of all the online resources where people can post about their thoughts on a company's culture, I think in my experience, Glassdoor is probably the best.
Thanks. Yeah, that's super good tip. Any other points on that? Otherwise, we can move on to our next kind of question. So we have some different backgrounds here, but what do you think was the most kind of jarring difference from your previous position or academia to when you first entered industry? Dr. Hammer, if you want to start.
For me, it was something I touched on a little bit earlier, but the focus on kind of individual success on your grant or your project, and being, you're the only one driving this, to now being a part of a team. And so just that difference for me, I wouldn't say it was jarring, but I learned really quickly that it was about the success of the team and not your own individual success. And the individuals that I've seen adapt best to industry have that mindset to be part of a team, versus those that maintained kind of protectiveness and secrecy and security about their project in the company. They tend to not survive very long, or don't stay because they're not happy. And so I think that is one key point I would really like the participants to take away from today, is you do need to have an open-minded, collaborative mindset. And that was the key thing I noticed. And yeah, I like it though.
Thank you. Dr. Zach, anything?
I would say for me, it was, I was in a position where I was recommending therapy. So as a part of a team rounding with physicians, as the PharmD on that team, our job was to say, you need to put the person on this, we need to adjust the dose, we need to, what might we do? And when you work for an industry, you're representing the industry. So in medical affairs, we're very careful about how industries, what they say and what they can recommend on behalf of the industry. So I might be able to present information, but it's up to them to draw the conclusion, or I was used to drawing the conclusion for them. And I would say the other thing, and I think it's for all of us, whether you're in research or not, is compliance. And that's really the legal compliance aspect of it. So what can we say? How can we say it? How do we say it that it's non-promotional? Or how do we communicate the results of this trial in a certain way? So that's taken me a while to figure out that nuance of how to provide solutions, do things, but in a way that does not pose risk to the pharmaceutical company that you work for. So those are the two things, kind of unique to medical affairs a bit. So.
I can second that from my area. I think that's a really important skill. Just before we go to the Q&A, I'd like to hear from you guys, what do you enjoy most about industry? I kind of see that you guys have touched on that, but if you just want to give kind of your final words about, what would you really promote? What's the thing that, really touches your heart about working in industry?
I already talked a little bit about just how much I love the immediate impact of the products we're making. So the other thing I would talk about is I just love the people I get to work with and the friendships and relationships I've been able to build across the globe. And so I have many, many colleagues in France and throughout Europe, and to be able to build those connections has been really incredible. And I absolutely love the people I work with. I think it's fun to work with your friends, and I feel like I've been in this job long enough that I've developed a lot of friendships, and I just really cherish that.
For me, it was my last bunch of jobs were building teams and kind of taking teams that maybe were felt to be underperforming and changing them. So that's been a lot of fun. And how do you put the right people together? How do you let those people shine? Where do we spend time? Where do we not as a team? And I would say the other thing that was, whether you work for a hospital, wherever you worked, and you think about even academia, in a sense, it's a business, but it's easy to kind of, in my thing, I'm doing my research, or I'm here taking care of patients. In pharma, especially when I work with the payers and like big organizations, it's kind of fun to think about the product, the drug, the science, but also what does that mean with the business? So how do those business people, and that's, I don't have an MBA, I wasn't trained in business. So that's kind of fun for me to think and learn about. I'm not an expert in it. I'm not an expert in contracting and in how things work, but it challenges me to go beyond just the clinical story to move into what is the business or what's called the value proposition. So that's kind of fun. It's kind of hard. So thanks.
That's excellent. Okay, so with that, we'll move into the question and answer portion. There are some excellent questions, so we'll try to get to everyone in the Q&A. But one that I thought was really excellent question, and it might be directed towards Lawrence first. This individual is taking classes online through Coursera and trying to learn some skills that they did not learn formally as part of his or her degrees. How best can I show on my resume that I've learned these skills informally?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I saw that one pop up, and I was tempted to hop on Coursera, because I've been on Coursera before. I was tempted to hop on there and look around a little bit. I don't recall if Coursera gives you certifications for completing your courses. If it does, I would have a certifications section on your resume that you would list that under. But again, if you can't do that on Coursera, then that's kind of a moot point. But that's the number one way I could think of making sure to give yourself some credit for that.
And building off that, there's another question. Are there any special trainings or courses that a PhD could enroll in to make a transition easier or maybe to build their network?
So one thing that I did is where I received my PhD, there were opportunities to take classes from the business school at the same university and to even partner in a program they had called Launching the Venture that helped us take kind of our projects from an academic sense and they partnered us up with a lawyer and with a venture capitalist or an angel investor, and we got to start thinking and learning and taking some business classes. So depending on where you are, I think there may be opportunities through the business school. Maybe your university or academic setting already has something in place. If not, maybe you could start asking questions around that. But that helped me start to develop the lingo. When Margie talked about value proposition, I remember the class on value proposition, right? So things that you didn't learn in the lab that are important to help with. And I found that incredibly productive.
Awesome. That's a really great tip. Any other tips, Margie, or Lawrence? Not off the top of your head?
Funny, I
Well,
might take a minute to ask Lawrence his thoughts. It's hard to break into the field and get to know people. So it definitely is. I was fortunate because medical liaisons called on me due to my position, in a hospital, but my position was different than yours. So there is a group called the Medical Science Liaison Society or something like that. I'm not a big, I'm not a huge fan because they kind of created themselves and they kind of say, oh, well, we're now the expert. But it is a way to start to get to know people and do it. So I've seen some really good people come from there. I would just say it may be very helpful, especially PhDs tend to come that route. So it may be it, but don't feel just that you did that. I'm now, I've done this and it's going to be highly valued by anybody. So it is a way. MAPS is another society, Medical Affairs Professional Society. So that's, these are ones, MAPS is actually quite legitimate. That one I do really respect. I've been a member of that. So those may be ways, if nothing else, to start connecting with people. But I'd be curious, Lawrence, of your opinion, especially of the MSL Society, because I'm not a huge fan, but I'm not a fan either.
So yeah, and so you're kind of reading my mind. So I like the MSL Society just fine, okay? But they've got these certification courses that can get pretty expensive, and I cannot at all promise anyone that it's the juice is worth the squeeze there. I think it would help you build a network. I think it would help you kind of learn the lingo a little bit. Again, kind of going back to one of the things I said in one of my slides. Kind of talk the talk a little bit, but I've never seen a hiring manager say, "Oh, that person's got the medical science liaison certification. That makes them a better candidate than these other people." The only, I think the only way that really boosts, with this one specifically, I think the only way that really boosts your candidacy is it will make a hiring manager say, "You know what? I could tell they're very committed. They must really take this seriously. Let's hear them out." I think it give you that much, but is that worth $1,000? Yeah, no, that's up to you. I can't make that call for anyone. I have indeed heard great things about the Medical Affairs Professional Society, MAPS, that Marty's talking about. I don't know anything about any sort of certification courses they've got, but I've heard great things about their resources, that they're tangible. They are the kind of things that could be put to practice. So I think that is a great resource to check out. Another one that I've also heard of a couple called Cheeky Scientist and From Science to Pharma, but I've heard people say similar things to what Marty's saying about MSL Society, that they've got courses that could really get expensive, and they've unproven results as to whether or not it's worth it in your career to pay up front for stuff like that. So so all that to say, yeah, there are resources out there. Are they worth paying for certifications? Yeah, I don't know. I tend to shy away from that question. I certainly wouldn't. I'm not here to recommend any of them above the other to anyone, though. I guess I'll leave it at that. But yeah, there's options there if you want to go that route.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that is bringing us to the end of our session today. So I first of all want to thank the speakers. That there was so many good insights there. I myself have been in industry and I learned a lot today. So thank you very much for your time and all of your excellent insights. Before our audience signs off, we hope that you take a few moments to complete a short survey about this session and your interest in future webinars. And there are still a lot of questions in the chat. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and we can try to get those questions answered for you as well. So thank you, audience, for your participation. And thank you, speakers, again. Everyone have a happy holiday season and happy new year.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I hope it was
Bye.
useful.